Day 58. I woke up groggily to the strange sensation of vibrating in my foot. As my eyes began to flutter open, my brain caught up with what was happening, and the feeling in my foot was actually Bodhi growling. Quickly, I got out of bed and stepped over to the window to look outside. I glanced back at the clock as I moved, noting that it was only 3:36 in the morning. I looked out the bedroom's second-floor window, and my heart sank in my chest. The fog had descended much faster than I thought it would, and the house was completely enveloped in it. 3 of the spider-like creatures had already emerged from the cornfields at the far side of the property and were skittering back and forth around the yard. God damn it, I thought to myself. We should have left last night. Just as the thought entered the front of my mind, I watched a lurker peek through the corner stalks and make its way to the yard. I could hear its ominous clicking sounds through the glass, knowing that the creature was blind, and when I heard the clicking noises it was making this time, it caused me to wonder if that was some form of echolocation or something similar to that of a bat. I cursed under my breath and I hurried back to bed. I lightly shook Grace, trying to wake her without waking the girls in case they began to cry from being woken up. Grace, get up. We gotta go, I whispered. What? Why so early? It's not even light out yet, she said as her eyes began to focus. They're here. In the yard. We gotta move, I said, starting to get a little louder. Luckily, we still had a fully loaded shotgun in the room. I hadn't taken all the guns out of the vehicle already. I grabbed the shotgun and double-checked to confirm that it was loaded and there was already a shell chambered. Bodhi stood in front watching me, looking like he was ready to go. I will admit, it was astounding to see how much he had changed from being such a cowardly little cuddle pup into a courageous family protector, all in the course of a month and a half. Shit. Okay, what do you want me to do? Grace said, still coming out of her residual sleep daze. Wake the girls as quietly as you can. I'm going to make my way down the hall towards the steps. I just want you and the girls one room behind me until we have to make the run from the house to the car. Then I want you right on my ass. I'll wake up the other 2 on the way past their room. I'm sorry, we should have left last night. Okay, it doesn't matter, we're here now. Let's just make it out of here as best as we can, she said to me, before turning to start waking the girls. It's probably going to be a complete clusterfuck, but we got this. We can do it. I did my best to reassure her, but even as I said it, I wasn't sure if I was really talking to her or myself. Bodhi, with me. Stay close, puppy dog. I need you to be on your game right now. Bodhi chuffed and quickly moved to my side and began looking back and forth from the door to up at me. I opened the door and slowly made my way down the hall, trying my best to avoid any noisy spots on the floor. Bodhi stuck right by my side every step as I got to the other bedroom door. I nearly knocked on the door, but I realized it would be too loud, so instead I just turned the knob and slowly pushed the door open. I began whisper yelling into the room to wake them up. Brandy! Grant! Wake up! We gotta bug out! The creatures are here! Hurry, but be as quiet as possible! After a few seconds, I could hear some quiet rustling from inside the room, but how dark the house was and the room's lack of windows prevented me from seeing what was going on. Almost immediately after the rustling, the 2 of them appeared in the doorway ready to go. I was quite impressed with how easily they woke up and sprung into action. This gave me a lot of hope that they would be able to keep cool heads under pressure and not risk our lives by getting hysterical in tense situations. I motioned for them to quietly follow me, and they followed the instruction without hesitation. Just as we made it to the top of the steps, I looked back to see that Grace was waiting quietly at the bedroom door with the girls. I knew she understood that as we made it down the steps, her and the girls would move down the hall and wait at the top of them. What's the plan when we get down there? Grant whispered to me. Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't know if they have gotten in the house yet or not. And if they have, I don't know where they are. So, I hate to say it, but we kind of have to wing it. Hope for the best. The 2 of them looked at each other and simultaneously took a deep breath before Brandy responded. Okay, we're with you. I slowly crept down the stairs and stopped halfway down at the sound of glass breaking. Shit. They weren't in the house before, they sure as hell are now, I thought as I continued my descent. At the bottom of the steps, I peeked around the corner. You still had to get through the living room and the kitchen before we could make it out of the door to the vehicles. I heard a quieter scream from one of the spider creatures, followed by a screech from the lurker. I couldn't see any of them in the living room, so I began to move forward. Bodhi, Grant, and Brandy all followed closely behind. One of the spider creatures skittered into the doorway between the living room and the kitchen, but wasn't looking our direction. The orange glow from the fireball-looking hairs covering its body lit up the immediate area around it. It seemed to be studying the wall very intently for some reason. Suddenly, Bodhi began to growl at the creature, and I touched my hand to his head to stop him, but it was too late. The spider turned around and screamed, locking eyes with Bodhi, freezing him in place as he yelped from the mental assault. As I raised the gun to fire at the creature, another crawled from behind the couch and jumped at me. Grant called me to look out, but the creature was already in the air before the words came out. It hit me in the arm, the strange predator-like mouth biting into my flesh and causing me to drop the gun. The butt of the shotgun landed on Bodhi's head, causing him to break eye contact with the spider. As the gun made contact with the hardwood floor, it discharged and out of pure dumb luck, hit the spider creature in the doorway, peppering it with buckshot and sending it sliding across the floor and out of the kitchen into the cabinets. Grant saw the harpoon gun hanging on the wall and ran to it, grabbing it as quickly as he was able. I didn't think it was even functional, so I had decided to leave it when we were packing. Bodhi regained his composure from the gun landing on him and lunged at the back of the spider creature that had just taken a bite out of me. He sank his teeth into the strange, fat, lizard-like tail of the creature, and it screamed out in pain. The lurker from the yard ran into the house and screeched as it came around the corner of the kitchen and stopped at the doorway. The lurker made some clicking sounds, and just before it lunged at one of us, the harpoon from the gun hit it in the side and traveled clear through the beast's body. The barb sticking out the other side, fluid sputtering from the gills on its ribs for a few seconds before it took a couple steps towards us and then collapsed on the ground. "Holy fuck! Good shot!" I yelled. I reached down, picking up the shotgun and pumping it into load a new shell. As I did that, Grant flipped the harpoon gun around and, holding onto the barrel, began swinging and beating the spider creature to death while Bodhi held it in place. Bodhi let go as Grant took the last few swings, making sure the creature was nothing more than a bloodied pulp. Another spider came from the kitchen, and I aimed and fired before it could cause any more havoc. The shot hit its mark, causing it to slump to the ground and slide across the floor into the other corpse. With adrenaline and anxiety both skyrocketing, I yelled up to Grace. "Grace! New plan! We have to go right now!" The girls had started crying from the loud gunshots inside the house, but Grace did an excellent job of keeping them as calm as anyone possibly could have given the situation. She hurried down the steps with the girls, and Brandy picked up Addie and carried her. I led the way through the kitchen to the back door with Bodhi right by my side and Grant with his harpoon gun club right behind me. Grace and Brandy each carried one of the girls, and as we all huddled at the door to outside the kitchen, we all looked out the window into the yard. Straining my eyes in the darkness, I couldn't see any other creatures, but I knew that didn't actually mean anything. It was at this moment I was so thankful that we decided to always leave the keys in the ignition of the vehicles. Grace and I had made the choice after the events of trying to leave the famous farmhouse where we got the SUV in the first place. I was worried because I knew that we were all going to have to just run for our lives to the vehicles and hope for the best. I hated so much not having a solid plan. Running into a situation with no information and no plan is far from my favorite thing to do. With a heavy breath followed by 3 more to pump myself up, I quickly formulated the best plan I could. Okay, here we go. I don't know what's out there yet, but this is what we will do. Grant, you and I will go out first. Each of us stand guard by one of the vehicles. Grace, Brandy, I need you with the girls right behind us. Get the girls in the SUV as fast and quietly as possible. Once we're all in, then we can start the cars so we can be quiet for as long as possible. I'll lead us out and you guys follow close behind me. We'll get out of here in one piece, okay? We got this. We can do it. You ready? Grant held up a finger to tell me to wait, and he ran to the lurker and struggled a little bit, finally got the harpoon pulled out of it and reloaded the harpoon gun. I felt like an idiot for only having these 2 weapons in the house with the rest of them already out in the vehicles. He jogged back over to us once it was reloaded and nodded, letting me know that he was ready. I scanned around, meeting eyes with Grace and Brandy, each of them also nodding to let me know that everyone was ready. I took another deep breath and held it for a second before letting it go and opening the door. Grant and I pushed through the door almost at the same time. We all crouch-walked as best we could to the vehicles. The girls stayed close behind us, and Bodhi stuck close to Grace's side. It wasn't until I stopped to guard as Grace and Brandy got the girls to the SUV, then I felt the ground shaking. The methodical vibrations of footsteps terrified me as my heart began to race. Bodhi trotted over to my side and seemed to be looking very intently at the corner of the house. Once the girls were settled in, the doors were shut, and as soon as the sound of the doors shutting rang out in the quiet night, a screech erupted from around the corner of the house. Another lurker came around, full tilt from around the building directly at us. Bodhi barked and began to run at the creature. "Bodhi, no! Car! Now!" I yelled after him, horrified that he would get hurt. Bodhi abruptly ended his charge and ran back to the SUV and jumped inside. I raised the gun to my shoulder and aimed as best I could in the fog-shrouded moonlight. Just as I was about to fire, I heard a twang come from behind me as the harpoon flew past. I assumed that Grant had been aiming more towards the center of mass of the beast, but the harpoon caught the lurker in the hand and pinned it to the ground just as it had leapt at us. The flesh tore around the harpoon, causing the creature's vicious attack lunge to become nothing more than a clumsy sort of front flip. I dodged the sad acrobatic easily and spun, raising the gun and unloaded a shell point blank into its back, blowing a huge hole in the creature, and wordlessly reassuring me that it would not be getting back up. "Get in the Jeep! We gotta go, now!" I yelled at Grant, even though he already knew and was already in motion to the Jeep, where Bodhi was waiting for him. I glanced over and saw Grace waiting for me with a very worried look on her face. A scream from one of the spider creatures pierced the night, followed by another. Two of them came crawling around the corner of the roof of the house. Shit, I thought to myself as I turned and took a few steps to the SUV. Just as I opened the door, the colossal roar of the behemoth exploded through the sky. I slid the gun into the back and cranked the engine over. I saw the Jeep do the same on the side mirror. I mashed on the pedal and the Jeep followed closely behind as we tore ass out of there. I took two more of the spiders that had jumped on the road ahead of us by ramming and running them over. After about 20 miles, the fog began to lift as our distance from the creatures grew. The girls had fallen back to sleep since it was still early in the morning and the sun wasn't even up yet. Bodhi sat by the back windows and constantly watched the Jeep following us. As I drove, just staring out into the darkness, hardly lit by the headlights of the vehicle, I felt Grace's hand reach over and wrap itself around mine. I looked over at her and gave her my best attempt at a smile. "Thank you for protecting us, keeping us safe," she said softly, making sure to let the girls sleep. "I know it hasn't been easy." "Well, you are welcome. But don't think I haven't noticed your badass moments. You can definitely hold your own," I said to her, giving her a more genuine smile this time, like your flying leap to stab that spider with an arrow in the house, or your point-blank unloading an entire clip into the lurker in front of the grocery store. It was only 2 shots, not a full clip. I think it was more than 2. Don't sell yourself short. Either way, you've had some awesome badass moments. She flashed me her beautiful smile, and I smiled back at her. We sat in silence, driving a few more hours until the sun came up. Grace slept for most of the drive, but as the dawn finally arrived, I roused her from her slumber and pulled off the side of the road. The Jeep followed my lead and pulled in behind me. Grace groggily looked over at me, a slightly confused look on her face. I looked back to make sure the girls were still sleeping. Bodhi was lying on the floor between the girls, also mostly asleep. Finally, I spoke, answering the "what are we doing" look on my wife's face. "We need a plan. Time for an adult meeting." Grace nodded. We both got out of the vehicle, meeting Grant and Brandy near the hood of the Jeep. We began discussing what each of us thought we needed to do next. "So we don't need to make these stops every time we need to talk. I think we need some form of radios," I started. "Good idea. Where do you think we are?" Grant asked. "Yeah, where do we get fucking radios? I don't see any Radio Shack signs anywhere," Brandy added. "Truck stop," Grace blurts out after a few seconds of all of us being silent. It caused us all to look at her before she continued. "We had a truck stop in our town that had an entire section of CB radios, and antennas, and all that shit." Oh shit, good call," Brandy responded. "Cool. Anyone know where one is? Anybody got a map?" Grant asked. "Best bet would be to hit an interstate. Probably wouldn't have to go very far in either direction before we came across one," Grace said. "Nice, good. So we have an initial plan. Now we just need to find an interstate. And hopefully we can catch a sign here too. Also, if I see a gas station along the way, I'm going to stop so we can refuel. Maybe find some form of map inside. That would get us to an interstate faster," I said. Okay, I bet we'll come across one soon, Grant replied, starting to walk back to the driver's seat of the Jeep. Yeah, let's fucking do this, Brandy cheered, as she turned to return to the passenger seat. Grace and I returned to the SUV, and as we sat down, Grace stole the words out of my mouth. Damn, Brandy is a lively one, right? Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, I responded with a chuckle. I pulled off the shoulder and back to the road. Grace and I laughed back and forth as we cracked jokes at each other about our situation, trying to keep each other positive. Not long after we left the side of the road, we heard both the girls wake up. Mommy, I want my cup, Addie called from the back seat. I want juice in it. Grace and I looked at each other, and Grace crawled over the center console and into the back to dig around and find a bottle of juice that we had packed away and put in Addie's sippy cup. Izzy began to coo and cry when she saw Grace, so Grace decided to stay in the back and nurse her while Addie sipped on her juice. After a few more miles, I saw a sign for a nearby town and turned toward it, hoping it would have a gas station, and even more so, hoping that it would be an easy in-and-out event. However, I knew that nothing is ever as easy as I wish it would be. I heard a honk come from the Jeep behind me as we turned towards the town. Not knowing what Grant was trying to say, I rolled the window down and stuck my arm out of the window and gave both a thumbs up and thumbs down, trying to communicate if either approved or disapproved of heading towards the town. In response, he stuck his arm out of the window and waved at me. Again, I had no idea what that was supposed to mean, so I slowed down and stopped the SUV. What's up? Why are we stopping? Grace said from the back. Hang on, Grant's trying to tell me something, but I can't figure out what it is, so I'm just gonna have to go talk to him. I'll be right back. I got out of the SUV and walked back to the Jeep. Grant stayed in the vehicle, but left the windows down. What's up, man? Something wrong? No, I just think that, you and I should scout it out before we bring the wives and kids into the potential dangerous situation. I mean, we have no idea what kind of shape this town's gonna be in, he replied. Yeah, okay, good idea. I like that. Let's get up closer to it, and you and I can park the cars out of the way, go in together, on foot. Sound good? Yeah, it's just a heads up. I'm not as comfortable with a gun as much as I would be with one of those bows you have. Okay, cool. We have two of them, so one of them can be yours. Grace, I don't think, has ever shot one, so it's not going to be her first choice of weaponry anyway. I like the bows anyway because how quiet they are, so that's probably what we use, I replied. With that, I turned and I headed back to the SUV. When I got in, I let Grace know the new plan. She seemed to approve, and we moved down the road towards the town. As we got closer, I had to say, I didn't really see much movement, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. Around a half a mile or so from the first houses and buildings of our destination sat a big, clearly abandoned barn. I decided to stop there and use that as our base camp, so to speak. Before we got out of the SUV, though, I realized that I had just absorbed these two new people into our group without much discussion. With that thought in mind, Grace and I had a quick talk, which let me know that she sensed something about Brandy and Grant that made her feel comfortable. She agreed with me that we both thought that the two of them were a welcome addition to our little survival group. With that, they got out and I walked to Grant with both bows and a handful of arrows for each of us. You sure you're good? You up for this? I asked as I approached him, motioning to his wound. He glanced down at it, performed some sort of odd stretching maneuver before responding, Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, I'm fine. Just, what's the draw on those bows? Honestly, I have no idea. I found both of them. It's heavy, that's for sure. If I had to guess, I'd say it was somewhere in the 75 or more. The draw weight. They could be higher, but I'm positive it's no less than that, I said, knowing that it had been nothing more than a wild guess. It was heavy enough to put arrows in creatures, and I had the strength to pull it back. Beyond that, the specifications of the bows didn't really mean much to me. Not wanting to leave everyone else in a dangerous place before we left to do some scouting, Grant and I decided to check the barn first. At first glance, it was just a typical sized barn, like any you would imagine, but just by hearing the word, any paint it may have had in its prime was long gone now, and a few large holes had formed in the roof, possibly from the weight of snow or something in the winter, or maybe just from wood rot and despair. It was situated back a little way from the road on a small grassy patch of land surrounded by cornfields. The small driveway that led up to it very clearly had not seen any tires rolling up to the old structure in a very long time, and had completely grown over with grass and small plants. A long whine pierced the silence, causing both of us to draw our bows and freeze in place for a few seconds before we realized. The sound was nothing more than the creak of an old door swinging back and forth in the breeze. The interior of the barn was pretty uneventful. Nothing moved, and besides the boards that had fallen from the ceiling, the only things in the building were a couple of large piles left over from what I assumed used to be bales of hay. We came out of the back of the barn together, and split up walking around the opposite side of the building back towards the front. I heard Bodhi bark as I came around the corner, and back towards the SUV. I opened the door to tell Grace that we hadn't found anything, and to let the dog out to do his business. "Let's go, pup." "It's scouting time," I said, as he was already jumping out of the vehicle and wandering to find a spot to pee. "I know we don't have any binoculars, but take the rifle with the scope, watch down the road for us. If everything's okay, and we're ready for you to come into the town, I'll stand in the middle of the road and wave for you," I said to Grace. Just as Bodhi finished up, I heard Grant say from behind me that he was ready to go. The dog ran back to my side and sat inquisitively looking at me. This I took as him saying that he had already been ready. With that, I gave Grace a kiss and told her that we would be back as soon as we could. And the two of us and the dog headed out towards the town. While we walked half a mile or so into the town, Bodhi led the way a few feet ahead of us, while Grant and I talked about what each of us had been through. It was interesting to hear how someone else explained the turn of events that led them to the moment we found ourselves in now. Apparently, the crazy creature-worshipping cult that Grace and I had run into before had been only one of many cults that sprang up almost immediately after the fog and creatures showed up, and things went to shit. I learned from Grant that they didn't know where it all started, but after talking to some of the other people in the colony they were staying at, it sounded like lots of different places were attacked all at once. I guess that was the reason that not many people had survived, and most of them had died in the first few hours, or days. I told him about some of the odd encounters we had come across. As we got closer to the town, we both suddenly fell silent. Bodhi shortened his lead and retreated to just at my side instead of out ahead of us. I didn't think this was a very good sign, but since my dog had yet to learn how to speak English, all I could do was speculate on what was going through his mind. The three of us came up to the side of the first building, which looked to be long since abandoned. The town itself was small and quaint. It didn't have any roadblocks or any sign that there ever had been one, which to me meant that this town may have not been touched by the insanity that was going on for the rest of the world. It was one of those little country towns that you would hear people talk about, a one-road town, which would be very accurate to this place. However, just as that thought flooded my mind, I also noticed that as I scanned the town, as far as my eyes could see, I saw absolutely no movement. Now, I'm sure it would have looked comical if someone had seen the three of us peek our heads around the corner the way that we did, but it seemed to be the most effective way for Grant and I to see what was going on at the same time. Bows drawn, my head popped around the corner, highest up, with Grant crouched and his head popping around the corner, not too far underneath mine. Finally, Bodhi poked his head around the corner under Grant's. I'm still not entirely sure why he did. From that first building we came across, we could nearly see the whole town. Every bit of it consisted of roughly 10 to 20 houses, a small gas station, and a handful of storefronts along the main road, neatly all of which looked like they had been shut down and abandoned years ago, trying to formulate a plan that still stands at the corner of the first building. We began whispering back and forth. "I'm not seeing anything moving, man. What about you? You see anything?" I asked. "No, nothing. What are you thinking? What's the plan?" "Well, that means one of two things. Either this whole town is abandoned or someone's hiding from something. Neither option seems very promising." "Okay, yeah, you're right. So, what is it we need? Any food we can find? More gas? Walkie-talkies if we can find them? Just any other supplies we can find, right?" "Yeah, that's the goal. Well, that and hopefully a map, so we can figure out where we are. How to get to the interstate." "Okay. Yeah. Well, I see some gas pumps up ahead. I'm assuming that will take care of the gas and the food problems. Maybe the map and other supplies too?" "Good. Let's go do a little inspecting before we signal for the girls in the vehicles. I don't really want to assume this place is deserted just because we don't see any movement right this. Just then, Bodhi interrupted me, letting out a low growl at something I couldn't see for myself. Both Grant and I instantly fell silent and began searching intently at the road ahead of us. It was just then that I noticed that beside the low growl from Bodhi, it was eerily silent. I crouched next to Grant and placed my hand on Bodhi's back to calm him. He stopped growling but remained very focused on something in the distance down the road. I did my best to try to match his gaze to see if I could pick out what he was looking at, but I just couldn't see what it was. After what felt like ages, sitting in silence, all three of us looked out into the town searching for movement. I broke our silence once more. Okay, man, we need to move up closer. We can't just sit here forever waiting for something to happen. Here's our two options. What's your vote? Option 1, we move quick and low across the street to the side of the next building over there. Or option 2, we creep around the back side of this building, move up that way. One gives us more visibility but exposes us more. The other keeps us in cover longer, but it'll limit what we can see also. Shit. That's kind of a fucked setup either way, man. Yeah, I know. I gotta do something. Just then, Bodhi barked and started slowly walking out towards the street. Okay, shit, well, I guess the decision's made. Let's go, man. Low and fast, I said, as I began to move after Bodhi. The two of us crouch ran as fast as we could across the street and ducked off to the side of another building a little further down the road. Bodhi picked up his pace and matched our speed once we got close to him. And again, we peeked out around the corner, and again, Bodhi began to growl softly. There was clearly something up ahead that he could sense. The two of us couldn't see yet. Grant and I employed leapfrogging to prevent leaving ourselves unprotected in a blind spot. One of us would run to the next point of cover while the other watched. And after things were clear, the other would run to the next clear point following that. This allowed one of us to always have a clear line of sight, while the other was running up ahead. A tactic we both had seen in movies and thought would be appropriate to use. It only took a few jumps until the final movement would put us at the small 2-pump gas station. I noticed that all this sneaking around had still never turned up any movement, so I gave up the sneaking and casually walked over to the gas station. I still had my bow nocked and ready in case something did pop up, but it never did. I walked to the door, followed closely by both Grant and Bodhi. We were met with full shelves of dust-covered candy bars and various other items. It seemed like nobody had been inside the building in weeks. I announced to the other two that I thought that it was safe, and I was going to go to the end of the street and wave the girls over so we could fill up the vehicles. Grant said he was going to start packing up drinks and other food items. Addie wandered around the gas station while the tanks were being filled, and Grace carried Izzy around, letting her look around, and does not need to be in her car seat anymore. Bodhi kept a close eye on Addie, following her as they ran circles around the SUV. Grant hauled grocery bags filled with food and drink from the building to the car, while I stood cautiously looking all around. We seemed to be the only people in a long abandoned town, but I couldn't seem to shake the constant uneasy feeling I had from the area. A constant feeling that we were being watched. Once the Jeep was filled with fuel, Brandy began to fill the couple gas cans that we had found along the way, for just-in-case reasons. This is fucking eerie. You sure we're the only ones here? Brandy said as she finished topping off the last can. Yeah, I'm pretty sure anyway. We haven't seen any bodies or anything. Maybe they all just left when things started getting crazy. I knew it was a weak response, but it was the best I can come up with in the moment. I don't know. I doubt the kind of people that would live in this little town would just up and fuck off like that without fighting to keep their bitch-ass homes. Brandy shot back. Daddy, what's that? Look it! Addie yelled as she grabbed Grace's pant leg and hid behind her, pointing. Bodhi followed Addie's lead and ran to Grace's side before barking and growling. This immediately caught everyone's attention. I looked out in the direction she had been pointing. Near the base of the buildings, on the far side of the street, was something that looked like a furry ball the size of a cantaloupe, sitting in front of a large hole in the foundation. Past the opening of the hole was nothing but pure darkness. I don't know, sweetheart. Stay here with Mommy and Bodhi, I said, as I drew the bow and started slowly taking steps towards it. I knew that it hadn't been there before, which meant that something had placed whatever it was there. I didn't notice them doing it. It was kind of disappointing knowing that I definitely should have been paying more attention. "Grant! Situation!" I shouted, as he walked out of the building with another 2 bags of food and drink from inside. He dropped the bags and jogged up behind me, also drawing his bow. Suddenly, the door to one of the houses burst open and my heart skipped as every muscle in my body quickly tensed up. An older woman ran out of the house, crying hysterically and screaming about her son. I trained my arrow on her, but didn't fire, only watched. The woman ran up to the ball and picked it up, revealing itself to be a severed head. "What the fuck?" I heard Grant say in a whisper of disbelief behind me. Bodhi also whined behind me, and just as I was about to call out to the woman, I was filled with so many questions at seeing the other person. Out of the hole in the foundation of the building exploded a figure, a creature I'd never seen before, easily the size of a massive grizzly bear, pounced on the woman, and with a speed my eyes could barely register, it was almost cat-like with its movements. The creature itself was shaped almost like a panther or a lion, long and sleek. There was no fur like you would expect, but instead a dark skin pulled tight over its form. 2 large horns or spikes jutted from the creature's rear shoulder blades and arced slowly over its back towards its tail. Sharp black quills traced both sides of its spine, just like I had seen from the lurkers and the other large creatures. The quills spread apart as they moved further down its back until they reached its tail, where they began to come out at the sides of its tail, longer and more rigid, all the way up to the tip. It had 2 sets of front legs, each of which had what appeared to be bird-like feet and talons looking very similar to the feet of the lurkers. The rear legs had the same strange feet that the lurkers did, 3 longer toes coming from the front, while 3 smaller toes came out from the back. The head of the beast looked extremely strange, having almost a zipper of teeth, coming up vertically from its throat and stopping right in the middle of its face, just below its eyes. There were 2 eyes shaped like vertical ovals that alternated between blinking to leave one set open at all times, and it attached to each side of the massive, nearly flat-faced head. 2 smaller slits, I again assumed were its form of nostrils, sat underneath each set of eyes. 2 more horns, like those of the lurkers, protruded from the top of the creature's head. The neck of the beast was very thick and muscular, and just like the behemoth, it had 3 long slits running down each side of its neck, looking like horizontal shark gills. I soon realized why the creature's head and face looked so off-putting to me, as its entire face split vertically in 2 where the zipper of teeth had been, revealing more rows of razor-sharp teeth. A black ooze dripped from the open maw of the beast and onto the lady pinned beneath him. A long triple-forked tongue slowly slid out from the creature's throat, and each fork of the tongue then sprouted a long needle-like tooth, and the creature plunged its tongue into the woman. Within seconds, her screams of pain stopped, suddenly, and her body fell limp. The creature slammed its head down onto the lady, and its face or a mouth closed and removed a huge chunk of the woman's flesh. "What the fuck? Run! Get to the car now!" I yelled at everyone else. And we all scrambled for the vehicle. Grant and Brandy got to the Jeep first and quickly started the vehicle and peeled out, whipping the back end around as they took off back the way we came into town. Grace lifted Addie with one hand into the back of the SUV and hopped in behind her, still with Izzy in her arms. Bodhi stood behind and growled at the creature as I hopped into the driver's seat and turned and yelled at him to get in the car. I saw the creature stop and look at Bodhi, causing an influx of anxiety to rise in my throat. The creature's mouth split open and suddenly it bellowed out a loud, strange, unsettling mix of a guttural frog croaking and a deep gargle that I assumed was its version of a roar. The sound was so deep I could feel it vibrate the air like the subwoofers at a rave. The horrifying sound echoed in my mind and was shocking enough to cause Bodhi to retreat, and he quickly ran back and jumped in the Denali. Pulling the door shut behind him, I spun the vehicle around and sped back down the road after Brandy and Grant. The creature let out another strange type of roar and rammed into the side of the vehicle as we drove past, leaving a considerable-sized dent in the side. Speeding away from the situation, I looked in the side mirror to see the beast standing and shaking its head. Then I saw its mouth open again, most likely to emit another roar, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of the racing engine. We all drove for a few more miles until we came back across the intersection we had turned at to get into town. We all parked and got out, still frazzled from the sight of the new creature. As soon as all 4 adults stepped out of the vehicle, Brandy began to speak. Holy shit! Did you guys see that crazy fucker? Yeah. What was that? Have you guys ever seen one of those before? Grace replied. No! I think that thing was completely new to us. Did you see what it did? It used that head as bait. It set a trap, Grant said. Yeah. Like some sort of ambush predator. Do you think that's why nobody came out to meet us when we got there? Maybe they all knew it was there, I chimed in. Wait. But even if that was the cause, why wouldn't any of them already have tried to take it out? It's not like any of those creatures are invincible. It doesn't make sense. And maybe the whole town's a bunch of pussies. Or old people, Brandy replied. That one lady clearly didn't give a shit and ran out after the headline there. As the rest of them talked about what they thought was going on in the town, I stepped away to check on the girls and the dog. I looked at the sky as I walked back to the SUV and cursed under my breath, noticing that it had gotten late in the day. And we would need to either find a house to hold up in for the night or sleep in the vehicles. Bodhi met me at the window of the SUV, sitting in the driver's seat, just staring at the group of adults. Hey, you gotta be more careful in that poopy face. I don't want you to get hurt, I said to him, after opening the door and scratching his chest. He just licked my hand in response. You need to listen when I say we gotta go, okay? He just chuffed and let out a short, soft whine, which I took as him agreeing. Daddy, did you see it? It was a scary kitty. I don't like it, Eddie said from the back with her little sister, adding a random babble sounding for punctuation. Yeah, I saw it, sweetheart. You and Sissy okay? I'm good. Sissy's still being silly. She smiled and went back to making noises for Izzy to repeat back to her. I just smiled back and returned to the other adults, who had changed topics and were now discussing the items Grant had retrieved from the tiny gas station. I just caught the tail end of the conversation, but gathered that he had only been able to grab food and drink, but didn't find any other form of map or radios to communicate either. So guys, here's the deal. It's starting to get late. We'll be losing the lights soon. My thought is to keep driving another hour or two, and if we can't find anywhere we feel is safe enough to fortify, we need to sleep in the vehicles for the night, I announced. I say fuck it. Let's just drive for a little longer, plan to sleep in the fucking Jeep, Brandy added. Everyone seemed to agree that it was a good enough plan, and as Grace and I walked back to the SUV, I smiled as the thought flashed through my mind. I'm gonna need to get used to just how much Brandy cusses. Grace noticed my smile and asked what I was thinking. After I told her, she just chuckled and said, Yeah, me too. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. It really helps me out whenever you guys do things like listen or watch. And it really helps if you guys also subscribe to the podcast or subscribe to the YouTube channel, or do things like clicking the bell or clicking the like button. Also, it's becoming allergy season, and it's affecting me, in case you couldn't tell. Well, I have one thing that actually does help me out, and that's the help from my wife's tea. My wife makes tea and sells it online at etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea. If you guys want to test some for yourself, then head over to the shop, get yourself some of the Dark and Stormy Night, which is my personal favorite, and ask for the dabbing Mr. Creepypasta sticker. And as always, I want to give a very special thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon. You guys are the ones who help me keep the lights on in the house, as well as allow me to do things like commission brand new stories. In case you guys haven't noticed, we hit that tier. So, a very special thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stricken, Chase Burnett, Deanna Kraus, G Weevil 3, Tristain Pelton, 1-800-Nightmare, Acid System, Aaron Stormcrow, Azurine Fox, Bobby Karman, Chris Lovins, Cryptic Nightmares, The Doctor, Daniel Paulson, Dr. Stein and Mr. Happy, Eurogore, Freddy Krueger, Fried Chicken 12, Hades' Nephew, InfernalOne, James Bruce, James Lowe, Jason VR Wilson, JimboTheHutt, Jordan Nells, Jordan Johnson, Caleb Dougal, Kiri the Sloth, Legit Quad Feed, Liam Newman, Lisa Cottrell, Marco Takes Dabs 420, Michael Scharbrough, Nico Kaio, Nina Smith, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Rafael Rodriguez, Robert White, S-Man, Sky Harbor, Snails Burnett, Talon Karlik, The Ginger Bros, Trace Miles, Tsuji Campbell, Tynannie, Unknown Nobody, Andre Garcia, Brianna Wright, Brian Ace, Caspian, hogunkji, and someone you love. And also a very special thank you to everybody who's down there in the description down below. All you guys who are listed as Patreons and everybody who's even supporting for just $1, I really love and appreciate you guys. And if you want to join them, you can always head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Even $1 a month, honestly, it keeps the show going. So thank you guys so much. And to everyone out there, sweet dreams.